Okay, and we are now recording on the new discussion experience training. So if you have any experience using discussions already, much of this will be familiar. The discussion tool in D2L Brightspace has been updated specifically in the evaluation experience. If you have used the new evaluation experience in assignments, then it will look somewhat familiar. Because they modeled it on the same layout and changes. So we're going to dive in straight to just creating new discussions. So we're going to go to our discussions, and in discussions you have forums and topics. The forums are containers for topics. A forum, and this is very important, a forum cannot be responded to by a student. So it is a common problem that for instructors starting out in D2L Brightspace, that they create a forum, but they don't create a topic, and then the students can't respond because all they see is a message, but they don't see an option to reply to the thread or to create a thread. And so you do need a topic within a forum in order to have students actually respond in a discussion. And you can't have a topic without a forum. So usually it's preferable to create a forum first. However, you can actually create a topic and then create a new forum. So if you choose new topic, you get to choose from an existing forum if you have one, or you can create a new one right here. This hasn't always been the case. It used to be that you needed to create the forum first. And so if you got here and there were no forum options, it just wouldn't let you do anything. So this is a nice addition that's been around for a little while, that you can create a new forum while creating the topic. But I'm going to go ahead and choose one that already exists. We're going to choose our new discussion forum, and I'm going to call this assignment 3, or not assignment 3, discussion 3. And this is where I would put any description of what I want my students to respond to. It's going to be the prompt, it's going to be the requirements. So if I want them to respond to 2 other students, then I want to make sure I put that instruction in there. So let's say reply to this discussion, and this is basically what my instructions would be for whatever topic I want them to discuss. You have a number of options that can be useful, although some we don't necessarily recommend. Allow anonymous posts is almost something that is never used. That would really only be beneficial if you were wanting like an anonymous public survey where everybody could see everybody else's post, but you wouldn't know who made the comments. So that doesn't come up very often. That's not very useful for evaluating students. A moderator must approve individual posts before they display in the topic. That's another one that I don't generally recommend using. It requires a lot of oversight from the instructor. And I just haven't run into scenarios where any instructor needed to use it. Users must start a thread before they can reply or read and reply to other threads. This one I recommend. This one is especially important, for instance, in like reading and writing classes, sociology, kind of humanities classes, any discussion where a student is responding to reading material, because if they are unable to read what other people wrote before they write their own, it means that any student who didn't do the reading isn't able to read the responses from other people and sort of crib their own idea as to what the reading was about. So it basically requires them to do the reading in order to be able to post something relevant about the discussion. That being said, there is a caveat to this. A student can technically post anything in order to get access to see other people's posts. We have some students that thought they were being clever and they would post like one sentence or even a period into their post, and then that would give them the ability to see what everybody else wrote, and then they can actually edit their post. And so that allows them to kind of crib off of other students regarding the discussion topic. But The problem with that for the students is that you can actually see the update history of their posts. So if they've changed what they've commented, then you're able to see the history of that and see what they originally commented. And I will actually demonstrate that later. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that option checked. We're not going to do ratings of posts. I'm not sure I've actually seen an instructor ever use that feature either, so it's not something I'm going to cover. Restrictions is important if you have dates that you would want students to post by, or even dates that you no longer want them to be able to post in. So they've updated this, specifically the start dates and end dates. It used to be 2 different sets of dates, and now the visibility and the access dates are merged into this one interface. So let's say I have a start date and I want it to be available as of 12:01 a.m. this morning. I want it to be visible with access restricted before the start, which means that if I had set this up in days past, students wouldn't have been able to access the discussion topic prior to 12:01 a.m. this morning. You can actually have visible with submission restricted before start. So the difference between access restricted and submission restricted, access means you can actually see the full topic, and you can, but you can't respond to it. Access is restricted, whereas visible with submission restricted is slightly more access. It's not really much different. Visible with submission restricted, so you can't submit to it, but you can see it with more than you would from the access restricted. This means you can see it, but you can't click on it at all to view the full topic, whereas this allows you to view the full topic. Hidden before start means they cannot see it at all. They can't access it. They can't submit to it. It's not there as far as they're aware. It doesn't exist in their interface until this date arrives. And then the settings are essentially the same, except on the back end with the end date. So let's say I wanted this to be due next week at 11:59 p.m. and I want to say visible with submission restricted after end. This is something that I recommend generally when you have end dates on discussions. You usually want the discussion to remain visible to students. They should be able to go back and see what they wrote and what other people wrote, especially if it's on a topic that is relevant to the course. If you have a course that builds upon previous lessons, there's not really a reason why a student shouldn't be able to go back and see what was discussed, especially if it was their own words. Display in calendar is a good option. So that will display both the start dates and the end dates that appear in the calendar on the home page. If you have the calendar widget appearing there on the home page, which is very common. You can create release conditions for access. This is rare for discussions in my experience, but you can create a release condition that says only people who have taken a certain quiz attempt have access to this discussion, because maybe you want to really restrict their access to it until they've done something else. That being said, sometimes release conditions like that will be creating unnecessary barriers for students, because sometimes the student will never get to something. And if that first item that they don't get to is a condition for another item, then they won't be able to do the second item either. And maybe that's what you prefer, but in some cases that may just restrict their ability of moving forward in the course. Group and section restrictions. If we have time, I'll get to this at the end of the training, but you can actually set up group and section restrictions. You can create custom groups if you have group discussions that you'd like to set up. So basically, The most common example is if you have a class where students are able to pick which book they'd like to read, then you can break them up into groups based on which book they chose to read. So if some students are reading 1984 and some people are reading Catcher in the Rye, then you can have different groups for each book, and you can restrict access to those discussion topics based on that group enrollment. You can also do section restrictions, and this is important if you cross-list your course, which is merging two different sections of the same course into the same shell. You can actually restrict discussions to a single section so that only students who are enrolled in one particular section of the course will be able to see the discussion posts from other students in the same section and not from the students in the other section. But that's more of an edge case. And then we have assessment. The assessment tab is relating to grading. If you don't already have a grade item in existence, you can create one. I'm not going to go over the process for this. I'm just going to throw one in here real quick. Say that it's good. So you can add rubrics to discussions. I have a simple one that I've created called simple discussion rubric, and we'll go over that in a minute when I'm grading student posts. But you don't need a rubric to grade discussions, but it is possible if you have one that you'd like to use for assessment. And this option, allow assessment of individual posts, is specifically about a scenario where you would have students posting multiple times within the same discussion. Do you want to grade each individual post as if it is a separate item? So if they post 3 times and one of the posts is much better than the others, maybe you want to give full credit to the first one and maybe less credit to the others. It's not something that I see a lot of instructors using, but that is possible. And I'm going to go ahead and hit save and close, and this will create our discussion 3 at the bottom under the new discussion forum. And you'll notice it's got the availability dates that I put in for when it closes and when it opens. And if I go back to the course homepage, since I checked that it should appear on the calendar, here we go. So you're only seeing the end date because that's in the future. The start date that I had for 12:01 a.m. this morning is now in the past, so it's not going to show up. It would show up if I went to the full calendar event, but yeah, the discussion availability ends next week at 11:59 p.m., which is what I set up. Something to note in content: if you link a discussion thread or discussion topic in the content by going to existing activities, choosing discussions, and going to the forum and adding it here, when it shows up, it will show you the full description of the discussion topic in the content area. It'll show you the availability and end dates. Something that's important to note is that a link in discussion, in content, can have a due date assigned to it from the content area, but that due date only lives in the content. The due dates for discussions are not really a thing in D2L Brightspace. The end date is what is considered to be the due date, but the due date, that particular phrasing, is something that is a function that exists in content where you can mark something as being due. So you can say due date here and say, hey, I want this assignment to be, this lecture to be read today. But using that same functionality on discussions is not recommended because it's not really attached to the discussion. It's only attached to the link to the discussion that lives in the content area. So that's a good caveat. And the other thing that's important about that is that this due date doesn't get updated in a bulk update of the dates when you're moving to a new term. So you might have students panic because they see a due date from a previous term saying, hey, you were supposed to have turned in this discussion 3 months ago, and they get concerned about that. So I don't recommend trying to use due dates from the content on links to discussions. But we're going to go ahead and get into the discussions, and we're going to see what it looks like from the student perspective. So I've got myself and one other employee as students in the class. So I'm going to impersonate myself as a student, and I'm going to participate in the discussion. So I've linked a simple discussion rubric. It's visible to the students so they can click on it and see what it looks like, so that they know how they are being evaluated for this. And I'm going to respond to it as if I know what the actual topic is, but I don't actually have a description, so it's really just anything. So just going to type hello there. And you'll note that it automatically subscribes you to the thread that you post to. So if anybody responds, then it should send you a notification that somebody has responded specifically to your message. There's something important to note about the terminology. When I am creating an initial post, which is a reply to a discussion topic, so discussion 3 is a topic that lives inside a forum, this post creates a thread, and a thread is the initial post plus any replies to the initial post or replies to replies within the initial post. So, or under the initial post. So that's what a thread is. So you'll often find terminology of thread, and so that refers to a single post that has children underneath it that people have responded to it. So I'm going to go ahead and post. And so my message appears there. I'm actually going to swap out and impersonate Carrie as another student in the course. And so what you will notice is the setting that I set, that the posts are not visible unless you have already posted yourself. So you must start a thread before you can read and reply to other threads. So you'll notice my post doesn't appear to Carrie when she's logged in as a student. You'll also notice the view looks different. So this is something that you can change in the settings for the discussions. If you go to your discussions page and hit this gear icon for settings, you can change the grid view or the reading view, and it will change. And you can also read threaded and unthreaded. Threaded means that it sorts messages by which thread they are in, whereas unthreaded will just list them in chronological order or another order if you change the order of it. So that is something significant to note. You can also choose to include the original post in your reply. That's a really great feature for email. I don't necessarily recommend it in the discussions because usually, unless it's a really long discussion, even then you really wouldn't want it for a long one. People can just scroll up and see the original message. So you might want to quote specific lines from a previous post if you are addressing specific lines and you want to make sure that it's clear which parts of the post you were referring to. But if it's just a general post in response to somebody else's post, then you don't really need this feature. And so I wouldn't recommend using it very often. So we're going to go back and we're going to have Carrie's account post her own. So we're going to say, hi there, and Carrie. It doesn't really matter what the topic or what the subject matter of our discussion is for this demonstration. It's also important to note that you can attach files, you can post images, you have the same abilities in discussion that you have elsewhere with creating content in D2L Brightspace. So you can insert quick links, you can add media, and students have some limited abilities to do the same. They don't have any instructor access, so certain of the tools they won't be able to use, like they won't have access to Kaltura/MyMedia. So their access will be limited based on their role. So Carrie is posted, and now that Carrie is posted, you'll notice that Carrie is able to see my post and able to read it. And she's also able to respond. And so we're going to say, and we will go ahead and post that. And so what you're seeing here in this view, this is threaded, where you have the original post and then you have a reply. And so the tabbing space here shows you that this is a child of this post, and you can even collapse it if you want to, or expand it to see. And so if there were more replies, you would see more down here. And now that we've seen from the student perspective what that looks like, we're going to evaluate the discussions to show you what the new discussion evaluation experience is. So as an instructor, I can go in and I can view the posts of the students. You'll notice the little blue bar on the left-hand side will show you anything that you haven't read yet, and it'll disappear once you view it. So that indicates I haven't read this one. I click on it. This is something that is often a topic of confusion for first-time users. They want to know how they can reply to a specific post. And what they don't often initially know is that you have to click on the title of the post to see the reply to thread button, or to see the reply button for the children comments within the thread. So that's an important thing to note, is that you do want to click all the way through to the post. But we're going to go ahead and assess the topic by clicking on this action menu for the discussion. So when we go to assess topic, it's going to give you a list of the students in the class. And in this case, I haven't evaluated either of them. I'm going to click on topic score in order to evaluate my post. And what you're looking at here is the new discussion evaluation experience. If you want to go back temporarily to the old version, you can turn it off, but I don't recommend that. At a certain point in the future, this option will no longer be available, and it will be enforced that you would evaluate through this experience only. So what you're seeing here is the students post, when they posted, how many words. So it does a nice word count for you. You can change the order. You can filter it by threads and replies, so you can see if it's an original post or if it's a reply. Michael didn't reply to anybody, so there is no messages listed here. But if I say threads, then it's going to show the original post that created a thread. So we have the simple discussion rubric that I had created and attached that we can use to evaluate this. You don't need a rubric. If you want to, you can just read the post and say, hey, great job. You can give them more information. You can link documents. You can do all of your multimedia stuff here as well. So if you want to link a rubric that you have as a Word doc or something like that, you can do that if you wanted to. However, I do have this rubric attached, so I'm going to go ahead and evaluate based on the rubric. And so I have these different levels that I've created with different possible scores. Thoroughly addressed the topic, exceeded the minimum number of words required. It's not actually true because I only posted 2 words in the post, but we're going to go ahead and pretend like I did. So it automatically assigns the full 10 points based on the level that I chose. And you can adjust that if you didn't like it and it's like, okay, well, it was pretty good, but it wasn't perfect. We're gonna put in a 9. We'll do that. It will still report the level that was chosen in the rubric, though. So you might want to explain to the students, like, -1 point, not enough words. Something like that, just so that they understand why there would be a difference between the rubric and the overall grade. Although I do recommend, if you are going to do that, make sure your rubric is thorough enough that it would address all scenarios where the grade would match the rubric, preferably. You can save a draft. So if you're not done reading through their posts and grading, you can type in some notes and then save the draft so that you don't lose your place. One thing that you can also do is you can click on the title of it, and that will open up in a new tab the full post and thread. So you'll see anybody who responded to it. And if it was a response to somebody else's post, you'll see that as well. So that's actually a nifty feature where you can see the full context of the post. And I'm going to go ahead and publish this evaluation. And if I want to go back here, I can go to the previous student that I haven't evaluated yet And so that's carry. And so what we're seeing here is this is a reply and this is an original post. So if I filter by replies, I'll only see the one reply. And if I filter by threads, then I'll only see the original post that Carrie made. So we can say 7 out of 10, job. You can provide whatever feedback you like, and we're going to publish that score. So now that we're done assessing the topic, I'm going to impersonate myself as a student to see what that looks like from the student view. So students are able to go to the grades and they will see their discussion and they'll see, okay, 9 out of 10, great job, -1, not enough words in the post. When you link a rubric and use that to grade the students, they will have access to see the rubric filled out. So they'll see that I chose the 10-point level 4 criteria achievement. And so that's actually really nifty if you want to prevent students from having to ask you questions about, like, why did I only get 7 out of 10? What could I have done differently? Obviously, you can provide more specific assistance and feedback. But if you want to get some of the general feedback out of the way very easily with a rubric, especially since a lot of students commonly make the same mistakes, then that's actually a really good strategy. So that is the new evaluation experience. And I think that pretty much covers most of everything I was planning on covering, with the exception of group discussions. So I'm going to go ahead and cover the creation of a group discussion or a section discussion. So what you can do is create a new topic, choose a forum, and I'm going to call this section discussion. And I'm going to go to my restrictions. And I'm going to restrict this topic to the following groups and sections. And so when I click on that, unfortunately, I can't do it because I don't have a section created, because this isn't actually a real course. But if I had a section, a specific CRN that was in an official course shell, I'd be able to choose that and add that. If I had groups that I wanted to designate as having access to this, I could. So that is something I can demonstrate. So I'm going to go to the groups tool and create a simple category for discussion groups. One thing you may not have seen in that is that you can actually create the group discussions here in advance if you want to. And I often recommend this if you are creating groups, but I'm not going to demonstrate that from here. I'm actually going to demonstrate that from the discussions. So my section discussion is now a group discussion. So I'm going to edit the topic and change the name. We're going to go to the restrictions, restrict this topic to the following groups and sections. And I want this to be group 1. So only people who are in group 1 will be able to see this discussion topic. That being said, this isn't the most efficient way of creating it. I do recommend actually creating it. If you're doing a group discussion, create it using the groups tool when you create the groups in advance. So know how many discussions you want to create. Doing it after the fact this way is not necessarily the most efficient way of doing it. And it's not as clear. It makes it more likely that you'll make a human mistake. And that is pretty much everything for creation of discussions and the new discussion evaluation experience. So I will go ahead and end the training. Thank you.